Kevin had nearly sacrificed his chances of winning the epic clash after Mason Zimmerman was taken away by an angry pterodactyl, but with the help of Katja, previously Kevin's enemy, but now another ally who turned in her opinion after he saved her life as well during the prehistoric round, Kevin, Mason, and Katja survived their encounter with the fierce dinosaurs and made it through the door to await the next round. Kevin emerged from the prehistoric arena starting to feel drained. He had one more power pill and one more recovery pill in his pocket, but 2 more rounds to make it through. All of his preparation was paying off, but he would definitely need a power boost soon. He wished he had brought some of the guarana berries from the jungle arena with him. They would have given him another jolt of needed energy. But they were gone along with his ally from that round, Sasha, who had not made it to the following arena and was now likely stuck somewhere waiting to be stripped of his herbalist powers. Kevin felt for the kid, but so much had happened since then that he had no choice but to look forward. What would the next round be? They had been underwater in the jungle and now catapulted back through time to when dinosaurs roamed the earth. What could be next? Kevin almost didn't dare to speculate. Welcome to our top 40 competitors. The MC, Sean McAllister, boomed through the PA system. Kevin looked around and got his bearings. He was in an antechamber not unlike the ones from the previous 3 rounds, only it was obvious that this room was smaller. Only 40 competitors remained after all, not as much space was needed. This room looked more like a dining hall for a large manor house. Kevin had emerged from a door to his left, and before him sat a long dining room table with dozens of chairs lined along its 4 sides. Each chair had a place setting in front of it, and each place setting had 4 or 5 bowls of various herbs and elements. No burners, no lab equipment, just the plain elements presented like appetizers. Candelabras with flickering candles ran down the center of the table, illuminating the room. Kevin had no idea what time it was, of course, but given the low light coming in through a few high windows, he guessed the arena was in the last rays of sunlight before dusk. Please have a seat. You'll find a place setting with your name on it around the table, Sean continued. Kevin and the other competitors obeyed and sat down, and within a few minutes everyone had arrived and taken their seats. Sean's voice came back. In just a moment, you'll enter round 4 of this year's Epic Clash. As usual, you will now have 10 minutes to prepare for whatever you think lies in store for you. The ingredients before you are not to be altered or toyed with, only consumed or taken with you as you see fit. Oh, and this round, 30 competitors will be eliminated. That's right, only the top 10 placements will advance to the final round. There was muttering and whispers of disappointment at this announcement. Kevin could see people looking more desperate around the table, sizing one another up to figure their odds. This was it. Anyone who didn't pass this round would be stripped of their herbalism powers, and anyone who did make it through the round and into the top 10 would be that much closer to ascending to the upper realm. Please pay close attention. Here is your clue. Everything is not what it seems. You can no longer trust your pairs or teams. In an hour's time, no more, no less, each beast will offer up their best. Gather your sword and shield, dear knight. The time has come for a noble fight. Your time starts now. Kevin took a quick look around the table. Mario was still there, as were Katja and Mason Zimmerman. Those were the 3 Kevin thought had the best chances of beating him. One enemy and 2 former enemies turned new friends, but he sized up the others as well. Without being in a battle scenario, it was difficult to read the levels of those around him, but he had come across a few of them in the previous rounds and easily bested them without any expert levels. so Kevin felt good about his odds of being victorious. He turned his attention back to the elements before him. Some people were grinding up herbs and crushing minerals and tossing back leaves like they were shots. Others were studying them under closer scrutiny and adding drops of water or saline here or there to bend the present herbalism properties to their will. Kevin identified the things before him as sage, betony, rue, and comfrey, all staples of medieval herb gardens that did everything from take away pain to ward off poisons to heal wounds and calm inflammation. Between that and the clue mentioning knights, Kevin was certain they were headed right into a medieval battlefield. He stuffed his pockets with the herbs, swallowed his power pill and recovery pills, and dressed a few of his minor injuries with the herbs mashed into a paste and applied directly to his skin. He felt the medicines take effect in his body as the rest of the competitors ran out of ways to prepare. Kevin estimated that they had maybe 60 seconds left before they were sent into the arena, but nothing was happening. He thought back to the clue. Everything is not what it seems. Kevin studied the herbs again. The one he thought was sage was actually something else. When he looked closer, he realized it was in fact clary sage, used in medieval times as an eye wash because it was believed to make one's vision clearer and more true. Everything is not as it seems. The 60 seconds were surely up by now, and the competitors had started to get more agitated. One even grumbled aloud, "Let's get on with it! Send us to the next arena!" Kevin ground up a handful of clary sage and got up from his chair. He went over to the far wall and studied it, looking for a hidden door or opening. There was nothing there at first, but he held up the powdered clary and blew it from his palm, casting it into a thick cloud over the wall. The door appeared. Slowly at first, then all at once, a massive iron door came into being on the face of the wall. It had been there the whole time, obscured by some sort of mysticism, and the clary sage had revealed it for what it was. Everyone behind Kevin went silent, letting him be the test subject for whatever he had just uncovered. Kevin waited another minute or two for further instruction before deciding that this was, in fact, the entrance to the arena. He grabbed the heavy door handle and pulled. The second a crack appeared between the door and the wall, he felt a lurch in his stomach, and he was sucked into the next arena. Kevin landed on all fours in what appeared to be a dungeon. It was a dark room with crumbling brick walls studded with handcuffs and chains. An iron door faced him, and by looking at it, Kevin could tell it was locked. He was in the cell with 3 other competitors, all of them standing up and brushing off. The portal must have taken them all inside at once. Right away, Kevin knew he would have to defeat these 3 to leave the cell. He leapt into action, kicking the man nearest him in the chest and knocking him flat on his back. The next man attacked Kevin from behind, jumping up in the air to land on Kevin's shoulders and wrap his legs around Kevin's neck. Kevin let the man's momentum drag him to the ground, but he then kept moving until he had rolled on top of the attacker. He pulled some of the crushed chamomile from his pocket and blew it in the man's face, instantly putting him into a deep sleep. The third competitor came up to him next, her fist cocked back for a right cross, which Kevin blocked easily, grabbing both the women's wrists and pulling them down hard so that he could drive a knee into her ribs. Coughing, she crumbled, and Kevin left the 3 behind to deal with the locked door. He knew he had to act quickly, and the first thing that came to mind was one of the herbs in his pocket, the comfrey. Studying the lock, there was not actually any sort of mechanism keeping it bolted shut. Rather, the metal had swelled in the hot dungeon air and the door couldn't be opened. Kevin remembered that the comfrey had a property to calm inflammation. If it worked on human flesh, maybe the door had been designed to act the same. He held the ground-up comfrey in his palm and spit into it, whipping the mixture into a paste. Gross, sure, but desperate times called for desperate measures. He rubbed the paste onto the bars where the door met its frame and waited, breathing hard. One of the competitors behind him groaned, coming to, and Kevin blew on the door to speed things along. Finally, after an agonizing few seconds, the iron door creaked. Kevin threw his shoulder against it, and it slowly squeaked open for him. He was out. He closed the door behind him and made another paste out of the sticky cleaver stems and stuck it between the door and the frame, hoping it would paste the thing shut for good. Kevin ran down the corridor outside of the dungeon and saw that there were cells lining the entire hallway, each holding a handful of competitors fighting to be the first out. On the far end, one cell was already open. Kevin needed to catch up. He remembered another line of the clue. In an hour's time, no more, no less, each beast will offer up its best. Kevin had to find these beasts as fast as possible because his life depended on it. Kevin was the first one to figure out the clue and get everyone transported into the medieval arena, but he wasn't the first one out of the dungeon cells. He realized that as he passed the open cell door at the end of the hall. Hearing other doors being banged on by his competitors who would surely soon escape, Kevin knew he had little time in order to get the upper hand in this round. The competitors had all emerged from the door that Kevin had created in the antechamber and then entered these cells in the basement dungeon of what Kevin assumed was a massive castle. The clue had been more straightforward than any of the previous rounds. Everything is not what it seems. You can no longer trust your pairs or teams. In an hour's time, no more, no less, each beast will offer up their best. Gather your sword and shield, dear knight. The time has come for a noble fight. Kevin was in the arena with a total of 40 competitors, only 10 of whom would be advancing to the next round, and the group included Mario Kessler, Katja Rafferty, and Mason Zimmerman, none of whom was going to step aside to let Kevin claim victory, and even if, in the prehistoric round, he'd actually saved Katja and Mason's lives. But it wasn't out of the question to expect some help from Katja and Mason. Both were appreciative of his efforts when battling the pterodactyls, and even if each wanted to win the contest and enter the upper realm, Kevin no longer expected deceit from either, though Mario Kessler was a different story. Kevin thought over the riddle as he found a tight stone spiral staircase and started sprinting up it. His power pill and recovery pill were kicking into overdrive in his system, and he felt like he could come out of this round of the arena first and quickly. After all, he only had 1 hour according to the clue. Think, Kevin. Let's go through it line by line, he told himself. Everything is not what it seems. You can no longer trust your pairs or teams. Well, the first part had proven true when Kevin revealed the hidden door in the antechamber that sucked everyone into the arena. He had more of the Clary Sage in his pocket and made a mental note to use it whenever he got stuck. Who knew what would be hiding around this place? Also, the clue actively discouraged the competitors from working in pairs or teams. Would Mario heed that warning? Was this the end of the elaborate conspiracy to team everyone up against Kevin? In an hour's time, no more, no less, each beast will offer up their best. The first part of that was clearly telling Kevin he had an hour to complete the arena. But what would happen if more than 10 people did so? Or fewer than 10 people, for that matter? Maybe the exits closed after an hour and they would be stranded in the arena to fight each other until a top 10 emerged victorious. Kevin was equipped for that, and he had trained hard for that. But he decided he would rather get out of the arena within the allotted time to ensure his spot in the top 10, beyond a shadow of a doubt. With only an hour to complete an escape, this arena must be tiny compared to the others, Kevin thought. Or at least the clues and materials they needed to escape would be nearby. They wouldn't make the competitors wander around a huge countryside to find clues if they only had 60 minutes to work. It would be a waste. Kevin kicked himself for not using more of the Clary Sage to check for alternate exits to his dungeon cell. The arena's exit might have been down there as a trick. But no, the rest of the riddle wouldn't make sense if that were the case. The line about beasts gave Kevin a thought that he hoped was wrong. This was a medieval arena. He had confirmed that now, when the spiral staircase led him out into the entry hall that looked like something out of a storybook. Rough gray brick made up the walls, one of which was occupied by a full story-high fireplace. Tapestries depicting knights and ladies and naturescapes hung on most of the free wall space. Windows near the ceiling let in the low light of dusk, just as they had in the antechamber before the round began. This round would play out against the last rays of the sun, Kevin thought. So if he was in a castle, where were the beasts? The fairies had taught Kevin that every beast in every medieval story was a dragon. Had the organizers of the epic clash engineered a dragon for him to fight? Or was this beast a more historically accurate one? Disease, a plague that Kevin would have to cure by refining a medicine out of the herbs he had stuffed in his pockets in the antechamber. On the wall near the fireplace was bolted a thick plank of wood with slots spaced out along it. In each slot, a sword had been sheathed, their hilts glinting in the firelight. Kevin could hear footsteps behind him now, and if these weapons were already in the arena and the clue said, "Gather your sword and shield," then surely arming himself wouldn't be a rule violation. He grabbed one of the swords and sheathed it through a loop on the hip of his combat pants. He then saw a gap between the nearest tapestry that revealed a hidden hallway. Rather than stick around to see how many competitors were coming up the stairs, he slipped behind the tapestry and took off. Kevin crept along, sword bumping against his thigh, and he realized the corridor he was in was probably a servant's passage. Old royalty and nobility would have these secret passages built into their homes so they can have guests over without the staff moving about the main rooms and distracting them from the luxury. Kevin followed it until he came upon another door, and he opened it slowly. It led him out into a bedroom where, on the bed, there was a large cat. Kevin guessed it was either a cougar or a lioness, until he saw it raise its head. Its head wasn't a cat's head. It was a human head. A woman's head. The creature on the bed was a sphinx. Kevin had read about sphinxes. They were mythical creatures who would challenge travelers with riddles. If the traveler answered the riddle incorrectly, he would be devoured on the spot. Kevin remembered the clue given in the antechamber and realized his first quest. He had to get something from this sphinx. Not only did he have to solve her riddle, but he had to convince her to hand over a treasure. Every beast will offer up their best. Kevin solved the clue. He would have to make it through this castle, gather one item from each beast in his path, and use them to make his final escape. But if this sphinx was his first challenge, and a dragon was surely in store down the line, would all of the beasts be mythical? There was only one way to find out. He walked further into the bedroom, and that human head swiveled on the sphinx's long neck to look at Kevin. "Hello," she cooed in a silky and sinister voice. Kevin approached the bed and kneeled, thinking it best to show as much respect as possible and not give the sphinx a reason to strike early. He bowed his head. "Good evening." "What is your quest?" Her voice hissed on the S's like she had a snake tongue. Kevin looked up at her. "I need your best riddle, whatever that may be, to escape this castle." "Then you must first answer this question." The sphinx sat up on her haunches and licked the back of one cat-like paw with a tongue that was both human-like and forked like a reptile. The riddle was coming. Kevin prayed his mental precision pill was still coursing through his system. "First, you hear a celestial name, the fifth sign symbol in the line-long fame. Then a sound much like a bird or a piece of paw or action served. Grind it up and add it in. Your time runs short and your chances thin." Kevin stayed frozen in place, still kneeling to honor the Sphinx while running through the riddle in his head over and over and over. Let's see. A celestial name, the fifth sign. That has to do with the zodiac. The names of the star constellations and the fifth one in the calendar. Would that be Leo? Leo is a sign of the zodiac after Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and Cancer. If Leo is the sign, what's the symbol? It's an animal, a lion. Okay, the first half of the answer is lion. Kevin snuck a glance up at the Sphinx. Her body was a lion's body, but with small budding wings sticking out from between her shoulder blades. She was a combination of many animal forms, just like Kevin's herbal remedies were combinations of many plant forms. She stared down at him with an icy gaze, the corners of her mouth twitching up like she couldn't wait for him to slip up so she could strike. Kevin refocused on the second half of the riddle. Then a sound much like a bird. Well, birds honk and birds tweet and some birds caw. Caw. A piece of paw would be a claw. Yes, that's much like a bird's caw. And an action served. I guess you could claw somebody. Okay, so lion claw. Lion claw. Grind it up and add it in. I could surely grind up a lion's claw and add it to whatever final mixture would get me out of here. And a lion claw is something the Sphinx could offer me. Okay, that's my answer. He raised his head again and the Sphinx's wet eyes sparkled with anticipation. The answer is a lion's claw. Kevin half expected the Sphinx to launch at him anyway and rip him apart with her own claws, but instead she sighed. Congratulations. You've bested me. She brought her paw up to her mouth and clamped her teeth down on one of her claws, ripping it out of herself with the sharp tearing motion of her neck. Kevin's jaw dropped as she extended the bloody claw to him, but he took it without complaint. This place was no joke. He wanted to ask the Sphinx where he should go next to find another beast, but she was already curled up on the bed again, seemingly asleep, her wounded paw healing and regrowing its nail before his very eyes. All right, one down. Who knows how many to go? Kevin tucked the lion's claw into his pocket and left the room. Looking at his watch, he saw that he had already been in the medieval arena for 9 minutes. According to the clue they had gotten before entering the arena, the competitors only had an hour in this round of the epic clash to escape, or else who knows what would happen. Only 10 of them would be advancing to the next round, and Kevin thought it likely that only 10 would finish this one, considering each round was more difficult and more dangerous. He had escaped the dungeon cell he had been thrown into, and now he had come face to face with his first beast, the Sphinx. After solving her riddle, she had been forced to surrender a claw to him. Now Kevin had to find the rest of the beasts and, according to the clue, collect an object from each of them that he would be able to use to get out of this castle for good. The sword he had pulled off the wall was still strapped to his hip, and he felt altogether confident about this round. Outside the bedroom where he had found the Sphinx, Kevin saw another staircase, a beast on each floor of the castle, perhaps. He took it up to the next landing where he found himself in a kitchen. He stepped inside quietly, closing the door behind him. Even though there were 40 competitors wandering around the castle, he hadn't heard anyone since before running into the Sphinx, and the place was starting to seem eerily quiet. The kitchen was large, its high arching ceiling rising up 2 stories at least. This castle must be massive, Kevin thought. Work counters dominated the center of the room. It looked like one was designed for baking, one for vegetable preparation, and one for meat. Kevin could tell because the grooves in the wood were packed with flour, onion skins, and blood, respectively. What beast could live here? And then Kevin saw it. In the roaring fireplace across the room, a pot hung from a metal frame. It looked like a cast iron container that Kevin would expect to see in any modern oven, or even in a blacksmith's forge. He knew that was how cooking got done back before stovetops, but this pot was not full of food. As Kevin stepped closer, he could see 3 shining black eggs resting on a bed of furry animal skin lining the pot. Dragon! He knew it immediately. These were reptilian eggs, lumpy and misshapen, and altogether uglier than bird eggs. And no lizard Kevin knew of could lay anything that size. Each one was as big as a football, which meant that somewhere around here a mother dragon was watching. Kevin looked straight up at the vaulted ceiling and saw among the rafters a small dragon lounging asleep across the beams. It was about 12 feet long, including the tail, which was hanging down like a pendant light over Kevin's head. This was going to be tricky. The eggs sitting in the pot were all black, but Kevin looked closer and he saw that, unlike he expected, the eggs weren't sweating in the heat. They were fake. And Kevin was willing to bet anything that these eggs were his target, the best this beast had to offer. They were probably full of ingredients for the final concoction Kevin would have to make to escape the castle once and for all. He looked up to check that the dragon was still sleeping, then slowly stretched out an arm to take the egg from the pot. That's when he felt a whack to the side of his face. Kevin was thrown off his feet and onto the floor in front of the hearth. He looked around to see what had happened, and he saw standing over him a sneering Mario Kessler, and behind Mario, Katja Rafferty. Kevin was confused. The clue at the beginning of the round had actively discouraged them from acting in teams or with allies. He couldn't believe Katja and Mario had just ignored Sean McAllister's direct warning. And he also couldn't believe that after Kevin had saved Katja's life in the prehistoric arena, she would so quickly betray him and align with Mario. The promise of achieving the upper realm and gaining higher levels in so little time surely convinced Katja that it was worth forgetting Kevin's chivalry. Though silent, Kevin could see in Katja's eyes that she had indeed decided to forget the last round and Kevin's heroic aid to her. She was vowing to win the epic clash at any cost. But for now, all he could worry about was taking these 2 down and keeping them from the eggs. From now on, he was on the dragon's team, defending them. Mario started to say, "If it isn't Kev," but Katja hit him on the shoulder and pointed up to the ceiling at the sleeping dragon. This would be a silent battle. Kevin jumped up and roundhouse kicked Mario in the face while he was still looking up above him. He then grabbed Katja by the back of her jacket and forced her across the room. She stumbled before redirecting her momentum to land on and roll across the cooking counters, hopping off on the other side seamlessly and without a sound. Kevin stared at Katja's flying body and had to remind himself again that she was no longer his friend but his competitor. Mario, meanwhile, wasn't as smooth. He pushed himself off the ground and came at Kevin with a high kick at his neck, but Kevin blocked it and drove a knee right into Mario's stomach. Mario crumpled with an oof that he tried his best to stifle. Still, the dragon stirred above them and everyone froze until it settled back into its loud, heavy breathing rhythm. Kevin stood firm in front of the fire as Katja launched herself off of the cooking counter and tried to take him out at the stomach. Kevin's first instinct was to step to the side and let her run herself straight into the fire, but if she did so, the pot would rattle, and the dragon would roast them alive thinking her babies were in danger. So instead, Kevin braced himself and absorbed her force, planting a knee on her chest and launching her back off of him. Unfortunately for everyone, Katja landed on a stack of pots and pans, raising the loudest racket possible. Kevin's heart sank. Competitors were sure to have heard that and they would come running for a chance to attack whoever did it. But of course, the more pressing issue was currently climbing down from the rafters above, with her mama dragon eyes getting redder by the second. The dragon landed on the floor hard between Kevin, who was still in front of the fire, Katja, who had stood up from the pile of cookware to Kevin's left, and Mario, who had just gotten up from the floor to the right. They were spread out in a triangle, and the dragon turned on the spot, getting eyes on all three of them. The last person she spied on was Kevin, who tried to hide the eggs from view so maybe the dragon would forget where she'd left them. But he had no such luck. The dragon lowered herself to all fours and began to slowly stalk toward Kevin. She didn't get far, however, before a knife appeared in her shoulder and she fell down. As she did, Katja was revealed behind her with her hand outstretched. She had taken a knife from the counter and stabbed the dragon in the shoulder. "What did you do that for? She was going to take Kevin out," Mario growled from his corner. "And then she would have taken the eggs and flown away. We need those, come on." The two of them closed in on the hearth to fight for the eggs, but as they got within a few feet of Kevin, the dragon stood up again, seemingly recovered from the shoulder wound. Everyone stopped in their tracks. The dragon charged at Kevin again, and this time he and Mario struck at once. Mario hit the dragon in the side of the head, and it sprayed ash and sparks of fire like spit as its head was tossed to the other side. Kevin then brought a chop down on the top of the beast's head, which was surprisingly hard until Kevin remembered that he wasn't just touching skin, he was touching armored scales. For good measure, he hopped up on the beast's head and straddled its neck. The dragon reared up on its hind legs, and while it was distracted, Katja and Mario grabbed two of the eggs and bolted from the room. Kevin swore under his breath. He had basically handed them a crucial element of their escape, and now he was stuck on a dragon. He unsheathed the sword from his waist and raised it up high above his head while the dragon thrashed around, her tail smashing glass cookware and candelabras. It was also still spewing fire, and the bricks making up the walls were streaked with black char. Kevin brought the sword down hard into the back of the dragon's neck, and she dropped to the floor. Kevin knew better now than to think she might be dead, so he ran to the pot, grabbed his egg, and ran from the room without even going back for the sword. He made it out to the corridor and sprinted for the staircase, taking the tightly spiraled stairs two at a time until he was let out on the next landing. It looked like the antechamber to a king or queen's bedroom, like a private sitting room. Another fireplace roared to one side, and a few high-backed wooden chairs sat in a semicircle facing it. No one else was there, so he bolted the door behind him and sat down in front of the fire to gather his thoughts and figure out how to use the egg. Below, he could hear the dragon roaring in anguish. Another fighter must have come upon it and taken his or her turn at slaying the beast in exchange for an egg. No matter. Kevin looked at the egg in his lap. It opened as expected by breaking at the center into two smaller cups. The whole thing was stuffed with gunpowder. Kevin smelled it the second the egg opened. There was enough to make a bomb that would level the entire castle. What in the world? All Kevin could think was that this kind of weaponry shouldn't be in the wrong hands, and the wrongest hands in the competition had just made off with two of them. Kevin rooted through the gunpowder in the dragon's egg to see if there were any other hints or clues for him in there, but nothing came up. He didn't want to carry this big egg around for the rest of the round, but he didn't know how much of the gunpowder he would end up needing. Nor did he have a better way to transport it around, so he just tucked the football-sized egg into a pocket on the side of his combat suit and stood up. Checking his watch, he saw that he had been in the arena for nearly 20 minutes. Time was running out fast, and he still didn't know how many beasts he had to face to gather enough ingredients to get out of here. He had been dropped into a medieval castle, and each floor so far had a beast to face and get something from. First, Kevin was up against a sphinx, and after solving her riddle, he had been given one of her claws to grind up and turn to powder. Then he had fought the dragon alongside Katja Rafferty and Mario Kessler, and each of them had made off with one of the eggs. Now he had made it to a higher floor of the castle and was ready for whatever would face him next. The power and recovery pills he had taken before the round began were working wonders, and the mental precision pill he had created was making short work of questions of strategy. He knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that he would have to make it up from the dungeons to the highest tower in the castle to get out of this place. It reminded him of a video game he used to play as a kid. Maybe I should be having more fun with this whole thing, he thought. Kevin left the antechamber to the bedroom he had been taking a rest in and moved down the corridor in silence. His sword was still downstairs in the dragon's neck, but he had the egg bumping against his body now. He kept going down the corridor with a calm feeling in his head and heart, like he knew his feet would take him to the right place. That place ended up being a massive room at the heart of the castle. Before Kevin even entered, he knew what it would be. He could smell the water and the damp stone surrounding it. This was a bathhouse. He entered the room and took in the sight. The walls were decorated with beautiful stained glass windows showing scenes from the Bible, mermaids swimming and resting on rocks, and general oceanscapes. Huge stone pillars held up the vaulted cathedral-like ceilings. In fact, the whole thing looked like the inside of a cathedral, only the floor wasn't covered in church pews. It was made of sleek black stone tiles around the edges and a vast pool in the center. Iron chandeliers hung low with candle wax dripping around the edges of the pool. Kevin felt his feet continue to walk, and before he knew it, he was standing at the very edge of the pool, pulling off the top of his combat suit. He shook his head. "What are you doing?" he asked himself. But he couldn't stop. He couldn't keep his arms from sliding out of their sleeves, or his feet from leaving their shoes. Something was going on. It was like he was in a trance. And then he saw them. Sitting on the far end of the pool were a pair of sirens, half-bird, half-woman creatures the size of ostriches, whose sweet songs were famed for luring sailors toward rocky shores and wrecking their ships. And Kevin had been lured here since he entered the corridor. That feeling he'd had that he was sure he knew where to go had been a trance put on him by these singing sirens, who were now staring at him like he would make a very tasty dinner. Kevin immediately pulled out some of the powdered herbs he had stuffed into his pockets before the round began, dipped his other hand in water, and worked the powders into a thick, clay-like paste. Even as his legs under the influence of the sirens fought to get free of his pants, he shoved the clay into his ears to cut off his hearing. He remembered stories of these old sailors who had to fill their ears with candle wax or whatever else they had with them when they passed the islands of the sirens, so that they wouldn't fall into their death traps. It worked. Kevin no longer heard the low coos of the bird women, and he pulled his shirt and shoes back on quickly, feeling embarrassed that they had gotten him so far. Poor Lily at home would be appalled as she watched Kevin on the live television feed of the clash, but she would understand when she realized that these creatures had enchanted him. "You almost got me," he called over to them. As dangerous as these creatures were, he still had to gather an item from them to proceed on this quest. The sirens eyed him curiously now. He had disarmed them of their one weapon against him, and now that they had no attacks, he didn't know where the battle may lie. The sirens had big feathery bodies and bird legs and feet, but just above where a belly button would be, the feathers melted into human flesh. Their chests, shoulders, arms, necks, and heads were human. They also had big feathered wings coming out of their backs, and Kevin wondered what they felt about being cooped up in a castle, unable to stretch those wings and fly. Their fingernails curved over the edge of the pool. One of them cocked her head to the side in a very bird-like movement. "Won't you come swim with us? We love to swim." She slipped down into the water, adjusting her long hair so that it no longer obscured her chest. Kevin just rolled his eyes. Weaker men might fall for this, but he was only thinking of Lily, watching at home. Lily, he knew, would have faith that her husband was stronger than the pull of these sirens. Kevin shrugged. "Not much of a swimmer myself. I'm here to get something from you. Do you know what you're supposed to offer me?" The other siren threw her head back and laughed. At least, Kevin assumed she was laughing. He was still deaf with the clay in his ears and only knew what they were saying because his mental precision pill allowed him to read the lips of the sirens flawlessly. She faced him again and said, "We don't give something for nothing. What can you do for us? Convince us to please you." Kevin was getting annoyed at these seduction attempts now. He had precious few minutes in this arena and he wasn't going to spend them flirting with sirens. He started looking around them to see if they were guarding a treasure like the dragon had been, but their big fluffy bodies were too huge. So Kevin thought on his feet. Maybe he could turn it around and make them think he was seducing them. He turned on the charm. "It's a shame you two are cooped up in this castle. It must be lonely and isolating not being on the shores of the seas with your sisters. When's the last time you had a big, strong sailor to snack on?" The sirens exchanged looks suspicious of Kevin. One of them narrowed her eyes at him and said, "We are here upon request. We aren't some captive zoo animals. This is our new job." Kevin frowned. "The epic clash is your job? But it will be over any minute now. This round will be, at least. What happens to you then? This is temporary. You know that, right?" They exchanged another look. They did not know this. "We were promised payment for years and years of services." Kevin sighed. "I'm sorry, but you were lied to. You were just obstacles in a competition for humans like me. We are all trying to win an epic clash, and this is only one round of that challenge." The siren's feathers bristled. Their eyes flashed red for a moment. Kevin saw his chance. "But I can free you. I have a plan to escape this place, and I'll bring you with me if you can help me out." "What is this plan of yours?" "Well, look. I have a whole mess of gunpowder right here." He patted the egg. "I'm going to blow the roof off this place and you'll be free to fly away." This wasn't entirely true, but he was running out of time to get what he needed. The sirens exchanged another look, this one embarrassed. "We can't fly away. We would have done so already if we could. They've clipped our wings." The siren stretched out her wings as far as she could, and Kevin saw the feathers had been cut short. Until these sirens molted and grew new feathers, they wouldn't be able to stay airborne. Kevin put on his most comforting and sympathetic voice. "That's horrible. I'm so sorry that they did that to you. You didn't deserve it. You were promised work and shelter and protection, weren't you? And then they went and did this to you. You're prisoners here. But if I could heal you, you would be able to escape, wouldn't you?" The siren in the water raised an eyebrow. "You could heal us? How?" Kevin pulled a few of the herbs out of his pockets. "I can turn these into a medicine that will regrow your wings in moments. But if I do, you have to give me what I came here for." The sirens whispered to each other for a moment before turning to Kevin. "We will." Kevin would normally have been hesitant to trust these creatures, but he didn't have much time to come up with a way to bind them to their word. So he got to work, mixing up a salve to put on their wings and get them their freedom. As much as these beasts were an obstacle who were put there to harm or kill Kevin, he did feel bad for them. They had been tricked into being part of this competition. He at least was there willingly. He finished mixing the elements in the salve, pulling out the healing and regrowth properties of the comfrey and betony. He looked up at the sirens. "May I?" They nodded, and he walked around the edge of the pool to approach them, dabbing the salve on their clipped wings. Immediately, the red, irritated skin began to soothe and new feather buds appeared. The sirens sighed in relief. They had clearly been in great pain. "That is divine," one of them moaned. "Thank you, young knight. You may have what you need," the other siren cooed. She plucked a feather off of her thigh and handed it to Kevin. "This is what you seek. Go now. We will take care of some of your competitors on our way out." The sirens grinned at each other, and Kevin could tell take care of meant serious harm. No matter, that would only help him place higher. He tucked the feather away carefully, thanked the sirens, and ran from the room. He waited until he was back on the staircase to pull the clay out of his ears, just to be safe. He had avoided the sirens' calls once, but tempting fate twice could seriously hurt Kevin's chances of making it to the next round. Kevin had now gathered 3 precious ingredients from 3 different mythical beasts in the medieval castle arena. It was round 4 of the epic clash, and it was by far the shortest round. A half hour had passed already, and if the clue they had been given before the round began was anything to go by, Kevin had half an hour left to get out of this place. He had faced the Sphinx and gotten her claw, faced the dragon and gotten her egg, and now faced the pair of sirens and gotten a feather in exchange for healing their hurt wings. It was clear to Kevin that every beast he would come up against would be mythical, and he was still trying to figure out how that was possible. Were these beasts actually real, and all this time the myths had been true and they were just good at hiding it from modern society? Or were they engineered by the organizers of the epic clash? In a previous round, Kevin and his peers had faced down dinosaurs who were also real. Or were they? And why did it matter? Kevin only had half an hour left to gather his materials and make something out of them that would help him escape the arena. He decided to worry about the mechanics of this place later. For now, he had just made it up the stairs to the next floor of the castle, and he had to find the next beast. He jogged down the corridor this time, peeking into the different rooms he came across for signs of life. It was quiet in this place, a little too quiet. How many competitors were still in there? How many had made it out of the arena altogether, and how many were still trapped in the dungeon cells way down in the basement? Kevin scraped some of the leftover clay out of his ears. He had stuffed them to avoid hearing the siren song that would lure him to his death. And he had removed most of it, but some pieces were still in there. As he did so, he began to hear music, medieval court music, the kind that might be played at a king's feast or at a ball to entertain the nobility of the kingdom. It was likely a trap, as the siren song had been, but it was also likely coming from where the next beast was waiting for him, and he needed an offering from every creature to escape the arena. Kevin neared the end of the hall and reached a set of heavy wooden double doors, which he cracked open cautiously. Inside was a large feast hall about the size of a high school cafeteria. The walls and floors were made of the same dark stone, with rugs and tapestries covering most of their surface area to insulate the room. A raised platform stood at one end of the room in front of a roaring fireplace. It looked like where a king's throne might go, or where the court jester would entertain the dinner guests while they ate. At this moment, however, it was occupied by a quartet of musicians all circled around a long and fat python, who was curled on its own rug right next to the fire. The musicians each held a dusty old instrument, one lute, one set of bagpipes, one harp, and one pan flute. They were playing a sad tune now, much different from the upbeat and playful song they had been playing when Kevin heard them from the hall. He made his way carefully around the large dining table and up to the steps before the hearth. As he had done with the Sphinx, he knelt in honor to get on this beast's good side, though whether a snake would respond to such matters remained to be seen. Kevin waited to be addressed, but the musicians just played on and the snake stayed coiled up with seemingly no plans to rise. Kevin studied the musicians with a series of quick glances. He realized why they looked so short to him. They weren't human at all. They were gnomes. Tiny mythical beings who looked like grumpy old men but didn't grow much larger than the average toddler. They even wore tall red pointy hats like gnome statues that humans used as garden decorations. While they played their song, Kevin realized that they were stealing looks at him too, but more than that, they were looking past him. Kevin stood and turned around, ready for an attack, but he only found 3 of his fellow competitors creeping into the room quietly as he had, trying not to disturb the massive snake sleeping in the glow of the flames. Kevin was still ready to fight if he had to, but none of these competitors advanced on him. Instead, they gave him looks of, "What do we do with this beast?" which he returned with a shrug. The competitors joined him around the fire, all of them too afraid of the sleeping snake to attack one another. Kevin knew about gnomes just fine. They were mostly harmless creatures who guarded precious natural resources on their lands. He could see them offering up valuable minerals. But were they the beast? No. Surely the real challenge is the snake, Kevin thought. Speaking of which, as the gnomes finished their song, they allowed the notes to drag out and disappear into the air without starting another. In the silence, the snake stirred, and it raised its head, facing the flames. Kevin felt his breath catch in his throat. This was no ordinary snake. It was a Draconcapede, a beast with the body of a snake and the head of a human. Like the Sphinx and the Sirens, it was a messy mixture of nature, and the youthful male face that now turned to look at Kevin and his competitors was pointed and sharp, with the whispers of a beard sprouting from its cheeks and chin. Its hair, however, was not a man's hair. Instead, it was a tangle of smaller snakes, all writing to break free of the knots they had worked themselves into. This creature was a son of Medusa, and Kevin averted his eyes before it could make eye contact with him. One of his competitors was not so lucky, however. The snake man locked eyes with the fighter behind Kevin, and the fighter froze on the spot, going completely rigid before falling to the floor like a plank of wood. He didn't turn to stone like he would have had he faced the actual Medusa, but he paralyzed for the moment at least. The snake man grinned, his forked tongue flicking out from between his lips as he hissed with satisfaction. Paralyzing people must have brought him a rush of power or glee, because his beady black eyes were watering with delight. "So, who's first?" he hissed. Kevin looked at the remaining two competitors in the room with him, but they had all had their heads tucked down near their chests, refusing to move or to say anything. It always came down to Kevin to save the day. "I am here looking for your prized possession. I needed to defeat my enemies and leave this place, leave you in peace. If this is your castle, I am your humble guest, and I hope you will help me on my way," Kevin proclaimed, bolder than he had intended. The snake man slithered closer to him, uncoiling from the pile of himself that was stacked up near the fire. His head wiggled around Kevin's field of vision like he was trying to catch Kevin's eye and paralyze him too. But Kevin kept his eyes narrowed and averted from the icy gaze. "Won't you look a man in the eye when you're speaking to him?" the snake man taunted. Kevin shook his head. "You know I can't do that. I mean no disrespect. I only value my life." "It's a shame. I'm told I have eyes more enchanting than the Adriatic Sea." Kevin smiled. "I'm sure that's true, but I don't mean to waste your time. If I may have your treasure, I'll be on my way." One of his fellow competitors was sniffling beside him, apparently brought to tears by his fear of this creature. Kevin took a moment to be grateful he'd never been afraid of snakes. "But what's in it for me, soldier? Why would I give up my precious treasure when I could keep it for myself?" Before Kevin could respond, the doors behind him had banged open and he whipped around to see Mario Kessler entering, a giant ogre flanking him from behind. Mario's face cracked into a wide grin at the sight of Kevin standing there in striking range of the snake man. "Well, would you look at that? Kevin Williams as I live and breathe. I was wondering when our paths would cross again. This place is a downright maze, wouldn't you say?" Mario jeered, coming around the dining table and stepping over the paralyzed competitor without so much as a glance down at him. The ogre grunted and belched loudly behind him. Kevin studied the ogre for a moment. It was easily 8 feet tall and built like a tank, muscles bulging through loose and flabby skin the color of green olives. Its eyes were yellow and dull and set deep in its head below a prominent brow. It wore nothing but a dirty loincloth right above which a length of string was tied around its waist. Tied to that string, like a utility belt, was the dragon's egg Mario had gotten along with a bloody lion's claw and a handful of shredded siren feathers. It looked like Mario had enlisted the ogre to do his dirty work. He probably hadn't solved the Sphinx riddle or offered any payment to the sirens. He had just sent the ogre to rip out their body parts and take them for his own. Kevin was disgusted. This didn't seem like it was technically cheating, but surely the herbalists in the epic class should rely on brains more than brawn. Ogres were notoriously stupid and good at following orders. Mario wouldn't have even had to enchant this one or give it an obedience potion. All he would have to do is tell it to come along and attack whoever he put in front of it. But to Kevin's surprise, back in front of the fireplace, the Draconcapede had recoiled, his eye sticking out of its wound-up body, like it was hiding in fear. Mario sneered at it. He told the ogre, "You handle these idiots. I'll get the snake." Kevin watched as Mario walked straight past him and hoisted himself up onto the raised platform where the snake sat. Mario seemed to have no fear. All he saw was a snake with a human head. He clearly didn't know what this thing was capable of. "Now then, hand it over, you brute," Mario ordered. The snake went from being terrified of the ogre to being confused by Mario's request. And all it took was a quick glance from the snake for Mario to be paralyzed on the spot and fall over onto the floors the other competitor had. So dumb, Kevin muttered, shaking his head. But the ogre was now advancing at the competitor next to him, and he knew he would have to take on the ogre to resume his chat with the Snake Man. For his part, the Snake Man was looking scared again, now hiding behind his gnome musicians and watching the ogre raise his club ready to attack. Kevin felt something click in his brain. The Snake Man was terrified of the ogre, and if Kevin could kill the ogre, maybe the Snake Man would give him what he wanted. But that wouldn't happen if another competitor got the chance to kill the ogre first. While the ogre was busy swinging his club at the other fighter, Kevin ran at it, and with a flying kick he knocked it to the ground. The ogre stumbled getting up. Its reflexes were incredibly slow. It turned around and swung its club at Kevin, who ducked the attack and got a kick sunk into the beast's gut. It crumpled to the floor again. Kevin grabbed its club and raised it above its head, bringing down a swift blow on the ogre's head. He heard a sickening crunch, and the beast lay still, its tongue lolling out of its mouth. The two remaining competitors looked at Kevin, then at each other, then fled the room, lest they be the next victim of his attacks. Kevin brought the club up to the platform where the Snake Man was now watching with excitement in his eyes. He knelt again, holding the club up to the Draconcapede. "For you, I slayed the beast in your honor, so you may be free of fear." The Snake Man unwound his tail from the rest of his coils and wrapped it around the club, bringing it close to his face to inspect. His forked tongue shot out to lick ogre blood off of the aged wood. At the taste, his face melted into a smile. "Thank you, soldier. You may have what you seek." The Snake Man unwound his body all the way and revealed that he had been sitting on a treasure chest. On cue, the gnomes worked together to carry the chest over to Kevin and unlock it, revealing piles and piles of gold. Kevin knew gold had tons of mythical magical properties, and it sparkled in his eyes. He took a handful, stuffed it into his pocket, and bowed out of the room, careful to keep his eyes shut until the doors closed behind him. He checked his watch. He had just 10 minutes left before his hour was up, which was barely enough time. Kevin turned and ran for the stairs. When attempting to gain the treasure from the Snake Man, Kevin realized that Mario Kessler hadn't been successful on his own in the various arenas, but had taken on the powers of a brutish ogre who was doing Mario's dirty work for him. Kevin managed to kill the ogre as a favor to the terrified Snake Man, who then gave Kevin the gold that was part of the quest in the mythical arena. Meanwhile, Katja had been one step behind her competitors in the mythical arena, and she was becoming annoyed that though she'd aligned herself with Mario on and off throughout the epic clash, she had now decided she didn't want to work with Mario anymore. Using the ogre as extra muscle felt too much like cheating, and Katja couldn't risk being disqualified and losing her herbalism powers. Besides, the clue at the beginning of this round had told them they weren't allowed to work in pairs. In addition, she was beginning to suspect that Mario wasn't as good at this as he had promised he would be. None of his plans had any follow-through, and they were in round 4 with Kevin still in the running to win the entire competition and get to the upper realm, something Katja had vowed to do for years. She couldn't let a short time in Kevin's debt distract her from her goal. So she gave Mario the slip and found her own way out of the bathhouse and up to the next floor where the Snake Man had taken over the dining hall as his own private chamber, guarding his box of treasure with the help of 4 musical gnomes. When Katja got inside, Mario was knocked out on the floor, the ogre was dead, and the treasure was gone. That did it. She was switching teams. Katja snatched the belt of ingredients from the ogre's waist and ran from the room without looking the Snake Man in the eyes. She could tell by the mane of smaller snakes growing out of his head that he was a son of Medusa, who could paralyze her on sight. When she reached the corridor, she saw someone's heel whip out of sight around the corner. "Kevin," Katja muttered to herself. Katja sped up, following those heels to the spiral staircase and taking them 2 at a time, up and up and up. She had figured out by now that each floor held its own beast that she would have to face, but these stairs didn't seem like they were going to end. She climbed for minutes before they finally led out onto a landing. Well, not so much a landing as a tall tower with a lookout platform on one side and the lookout's rooms and quarters on the other. The whole rooftop area was only about the size of a large sofa, and the indoor quarters were only big enough for a small straw mattress, a chest of drawers, and a chamber pot. Kneeling in front of that straw mattress was Kevin Williams, all of the ingredients from the beasts laid out before him, trying to make something useful. Katja stepped inside, blocking the evening light and casting a shadow on Kevin's workspace. He turned and got into a battle-ready stance, but Katja put her hands up in surrender. "I come in peace," she said, and Kevin rolled his eyes. "Yeah, right. I've been on to you this whole time. I know you and Mario formed a coalition against me to knock me out of the clash early. Well, I'm still here." Katja nodded. "I know. I see now that I've put my faith in the wrong side of this fight. Mario would never have helped to save my life, and in fact, I'm sure he'd do the opposite if he got the chance. I want to help you get out of here. It should be us in the top 10, not Mario. He might be out. Who knows how long his paralysis will last? Here." She threw him the ogre's belt of supplies. She and Mario had used the supplies with success in the rounds with the beasts on the lower floors. "Whatever solution you've come up with for escaping this place, it will be 3 times stronger with our combined resources." Kevin eyed her. Why did she want his trust so badly? Could he dare believe what she was saying this time? That she was abandoning Mario? He looked down at his watch. They had just 4 minutes to escape this arena before the hour was up. He didn't have time to be careful. "Fine. Come here and help me." Katja knelt down next to him by the bed, and they stacked all of the supplies next to each other. 3 sphinx's claws, 3 dragon's eggs, a handful of siren feathers, and about 4 ounces of gold. Katja set to work on grinding up the sphinx's lion claws as the riddle had told them to do. Kevin pulled the feathers apart and reduced them to powder, as well as liquefied the gold using the fire from the candelabra hanging into the lookout's quarters. 3 minutes left. Kevin pulled the dragon's eggs toward himself. He was still baffled by what they were meant to do with 3 massive containers of gunpowder, but as he opened the 2 eggs Katja had brought, he found that one of them was filled with peppercorn and the other with ground chilies and spices. And that's when it clicked for him. He knew what to do. "Go find a goblet of water and a steel sword," he commanded Katja. She looked up confused. What? Why? No time to explain, just do it. Katja ran off without another word, and Kevin set to work measuring out very specific amounts of each of the elements before him. It was so obvious now. The riddle the competitors were given before the round had spelled it out for him. Everything is not as it seems. Gather your sword. Now Kevin understood how all of these mythical beasts had been conjured up and brought to this arena when they didn't exist in nature. Now he understood what the riddle was telling him. Katja returned with a sword and a goblet of water as ordered. Kevin was impressed with her swiftness. Only 30 precious seconds had passed. He began to explain as he worked. Lion's claw is the claw of the lion, yes, but it's also an herb that stimulates your immune system, allowing you to recover from illness. Look, when the claw is ground up, you can tell it was made of plant material. The claw shape it was in was an illusion. Now check out what's in the dragon's eggs. Gunpowder, peppercorn, and chili powder. Sharp bites of spice that wake up your senses, and gunpowder. The siren's feathers contain pure adrenaline, and gold was thought to purify the body in medieval times. I'm also carrying clary sage, which reveals illusions and clears the vision. It's what I used to make the first door appear that brought us into this place. Katja clearly wasn't following, but even still, Kevin was rubbing each element against the steel of the sword before dropping it into the goblet of water. So what? Kevin told her. So this arena isn't real. The creatures aren't real. We've been put into a trance or a dreamscape, and we're being sedated or something like that, and all of these herbs and metals combined will act like the most intense smelling salts of all time. If we combine them and drink them, we'll wake up. We'll be free of the arena. None of it's real. Katja slapped a hand on her forehead. Of course. No wonder all of my herbalism seem more powerful and magical here. It's an enhanced reality. We were never in any real danger. None of those monsters could have actually hurt us. Kevin finished whipping up the brew with 20 seconds to spare. He raised the cup over their heads, and they both opened their mouths like baby birds waiting for their mother to spit food into their mouths. Kevin poured the drink over them. The second the spicy bite of the liquid passed Kevin's lips, he felt himself being sucked upward, like a giant had stood over him with a vacuum. He opened his eyes, gasping, and found himself in a field. Katja was lying next to him, shooting up from the ground just a moment after he did, gasping and blinking in the sunlight. What was that about? Where are we? Katja got up and started pacing in larger and larger circles, but there was only a field as far as the eye could see. Kevin thought it looked like they had been dropped in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska. How did they do that anyway? How did they get us in that coma arena without us knowing? Katja asked the sky. Kevin shrugged. They must have slipped us something when we got out of the prehistoric arena. Or was that a dreamlike state too? Maybe the dinosaurs weren't real either, which would mean they slipped us something after we got out of the underwater arena. He was straining his eyes as far as he could along the horizon, but there was nothing in sight. No city, no ocean, not even a stray bark. So where are we now? Kevin knew the answer a moment before he said it. We're still in the arena. We didn't make it all the way out. We're stuck. Kevin and Katja were stranded in a field, seemingly in the middle of absolutely nowhere. They had both made it through the medieval castle arena of round 4 in the epic clash, but it seemed that they had made a crucial miscalculation. Kevin realized that the arena they were in had been a simulation. Somewhere between the underwater arena of round 2 and the prehistoric arena of round 3, they had been transported into a dreamscape where impossible obstacles faced them, dinosaurs and mythical creatures. But in the medieval castle, they had been able to gather the crucial ingredients from various beasts on each floor, and Kevin created a potion that would awaken all of their senses and hit them with a shot of adrenaline. effectively waking them out of their dream state and winning them the round. Why then were they still not back in one of the antechambers of the epic clash? Why weren't they preparing for the fifth and final round? Had they not made it out in time? Were they not in the top 10? And if not, what was this purgatory they had been sent to? Kevin was trying to think, but Katja was running around the empty field now, yelling at whoever might be watching, calling them a coward and a cheat for not letting her out of the round when she had so clearly succeeded in the task of escaping. Katja, come on, we have to focus. We might still be in the arena. We have to figure out how to wake up all the way, or if we did that right and have been taken somewhere else on purpose. Kevin pleaded, unable to do any problem solving with her panicking around him. I call foul play. I don't think they want us to win. I think they've shoved us sideways into this holding cell so that someone else can win the round and make the top 10. They're cheating and trying to make it look like we didn't make it out in time. We're going to lose our herbalist powers. Katja was still irate, but she obeyed in coming over to Kevin and sitting down next to him rather than running around like a chicken with its head cut off. Kevin knew that there was one true way to figure out if they were awake or still asleep. He had a small amount of ground-up clary sage in his pocket from the preparation room before the fourth round, and he sprinkled it into his eyeballs, blinking to coat the lenses of his eyes completely. Clary sage was known to clear any mist before one's eyes, whether literal, metaphysical, or mystical, and if they were still in some sort of false arena, he would know as soon as the powder cleared from his eyes. Katja watched him while holding her breath and wishing she could use the sage for herself. She would just have to trust Kevin for now. And since she had chosen to leave Mario Kessler in the dust, Kevin was her new ally. She believed he would lead them both out of here on top, and he surely had the stuff it takes to ascend to the upper realm. Kevin blinked the last of the powder away from his eyes and opened them again, looking around intently. Between the clary sage and the mental precision pill that was still in his system, he knew for sure that he was right. They were no longer in an arena. The field still stretched out before him, clear as day, and he could tell that he and Katja were awake. They had escaped the fourth round. Okay, it's true. We made it out, and they've put us in this field. Maybe this is the preparation area for the next round, Kevin told Katja. You're sure we're not in some hall of mirrors or dealing with an illusion to make this field larger than it appears? Katja questioned. Kevin nodded. I know, it's weird, but it's real. I think we have to just start walking and find a way back to the rest of the world. And so they did. Kevin picked a direction and they started walking. With his newly cleared and enhanced vision, he could see a cluster of evergreen trees in the far distance, and he knew if they could get there, they might find a clue box or a door or something to make sense of all of this. We might be in the fifth round already. Who knows? Katja suggested. Kevin nodded. This could be the final arena indeed. If that were the case, Kevin would eventually have to take out Katja so he could be the first one to advance. He pushed the thought away. He would cross that bridge when he came to it. After they had been walking for half an hour, the trees in the distance appearing only the slightest degree closer, Kevin tripped over something. He stumbled, rebalanced, and pushed aside some of the waist-high wildflowers and grass they were trudging through to reveal a human hand. What the? Katja, over here! Kevin gave the hand a good tug and found it was attached to a body. The body of Mason Zimmerman. Mason? Katja whispered. Mason was alive but unconscious. He had hit his head when he was dropped in this field or arena or whatever it was. Kevin pulled some of the leftover smelling salts he had made in the last round from his pocket and held them up to Mason's nose. Mason sat up with a gasp, just as Kevin and Katja had when they found themselves in the field. Mason stood up quickly, grasping Kevin's arm to stay balanced while his senses awoke. Where am I? Great question, Katja drawled, satisfied that Mason was okay and turning around to keep walking. Kevin was more patient. helping Mason for the first few steps before letting him walk on his own, resuming their journey to the clump of trees. We've escaped the 4th round, and this isn't a dreamscape arena, but we don't know if we're in round 5 yet, or if we have to find our way there from this strange space. There's no sun, Mason muttered. What? Kevin looked up to the sky and saw that Mason was right. While the sky was full of light, it wasn't sharp and clear as if the whole sky was obscured by a blanket of clouds. The result was a grayish-yellow haze, which Kevin's eyes were already adjusted to. That settled it. Round 5 had begun. They kept walking and picked up more and more competitors along the way, some of whom seemed to appear out of thin air around them, and some of whom were already wandering around, having been dumped in the field soon after Kevin had. All in all, as promised, they ended up with 10 in their group, the top 10 of the Epic Clash, the elite group that would be keeping their herbalism powers while everyone else had to lose theirs. The last person that they picked up was, much to Kevin's disappointment, Mario Kessler. He had appeared 100 yards or so in front of them, materializing on all fours and gasping and coughing like the rest of them. Katja shifted uncomfortably. She had outright abandoned Mario in the 4th round when he was knocked out on the floor in front of the snake monster. Mario joined the ranks without a word or an invitation. The 10 of them marched forth, wading through the overgrown field in silence, tense. Something more was coming, and they hadn't been put in a preparation room. They hadn't been given any herbs or elements to arm themselves with, and they hadn't been given a clue from Sean McAllister to go off of. "What's the plan here exactly?" Mason asked, jogging to catch up with Kevin, who was leading the charge for the trees. "There's got to be something in that tiny forest that will help us, or lead us elsewhere, or something, unless you have a better idea," Kevin grumbled. He wasn't pleased with the lack of instruction. He and the other competitors had been fighting for their lives in the clash, and the 10 of them were the best of the best. Why were they being punished with uncertainty? "What trees?" Mason asked. Kevin stopped and stared at him. "What do you mean, what trees?" "All I see is more field." Kevin turned to the rest of the group who had stopped walking when he had. "Do any of you see what I'm leading you toward?" There was a murmur of headshakes and shrugs. Kevin wasn't sure why they would follow him with no destination in sight, but he was the clear frontrunner at this point, so it wasn't too hard to figure out. "All right, well, there are trees, a small forest in fact, just over there. I can see it thanks to some clary sage. Maybe they'll appear to you when we get there." At last they made it to the clump of trees. The evergreens grew 30 feet in the air, and the wild grass and flowers faded into thicker and greener vegetation beyond the tree line. Just as Kevin had suspected, everyone with him gasped when they stepped onto the fertile soil and the forest appeared around them. "It's true!" He was right. "Whoa!" They trekked further into the forest until Kevin saw it. Mounted between metal reinforcements and pointing straight up to the sky was a small silver rocket ship. Looking in the closest window, Kevin could see 10 seats ready for passengers. They were going to outer space. Kevin placed his hands on the cool metal of the rocket ship. It was real, all right. After escaping the 4th round of the Epic Clash, all of the competitors had been transported to the huge open field that seemed unending, and the 5th and final round of the clash had begun. Now, thanks to Kevin's clear eyesight from the Clary Sage, they had found the next step in their journey, a rocket to outer space. Kevin looked around at the 9 other people assembled there. They were the top 10 competitors. None of them was at risk of losing his or her herbalism powers anymore, but only one of them would ascend to the upper realm and win the whole clash. Kevin could see a few of them looking at each other nervously, still on guard that the whole group might just break out into battle and finish one another then and there. If anyone wants to drop out or turn back, now's the time. You won't lose your powers, so you'd only be giving up the chance to ascend to the upper realm. Katja announced from next to Kevin. "What? Why would we drop out?" one competitor asked. "She just wants first place without working for it," another one jeered. Katja rolled her eyes. "If you're feeling good about going into space, by all means, let's go to space. I'm just saying that this is a crazy task. The Clash has never taken competitors to space before. We aren't trained, and who knows if there's any decent equipment in there for us. It could be a suicide mission." "Are you staying behind then?" Mario Kessler challenged her. Katja stared daggers at him. "Not on my life." With that, she swung open the entry hatch and climbed inside. Kevin followed. The rocket was facing upward, so they had to climb a tall ladder to get to the front row of seats. And to sit down, they actually had to lay on their backs with their knees up in front of them. Kevin strapped himself into the pilot seat. "You can pilot a rocket?" Katja asked, uncertain. Kevin didn't even give Katja's question a second thought. "I can pilot anything. How hard could it be?" Looking at the controls, he had a basic understanding of which button would start the engine and which would initiate the launch. But if he was honest, he doubted the Epic Clash organizers would leave the flying to him. There was probably a program in place to autopilot them to their destination. All but one of the competitors joined them in the rocket. The dropout was an older man who used heart problems as his excuse. "I'd have a heart attack the second we lifted off. This competition isn't worth dying over. I'm happy placing number 10, he told them. Kevin saluted him and advised him to get far away from the forest before the rocket blasted off, hoping someone would come to collect him and that he wouldn't just be stranded in this field forever. The rest of the competitors strapped in and put on their headsets. "Ready?" Kevin called through his radio. "Ready," 8 anxious voices called back. Kevin hit the buttons for engine ignition and liftoff and waited. It took a few moments, but the whole rocket started to vibrate and heat as the fire was literally lit under their seats. A computerized voice came through the headsets. 5, 4, 3, 2. We have liftoff. The whole machine shuddered, and the rocket jolted off the ground, blasting upward at an accelerating rate. Everyone grabbed their armrests, and Kevin kept a close eye on the oxygen meter on the controls in front of him. What he would do if the cabin of the rocket lost pressure, he didn't know at that exact moment, but he would figure it out. For now, it made him feel better just to keep an eye on it. Once the shock of taking off in a rocket wore away, the competitors scrambled to look out the windows at the Earth disappearing below them. First, the details of the land faded into specks and lines. Then the land shrank as oceans appeared in their line of vision. Then the curve of the Earth as a whole came into view, and the horizon became a hazy glow. Finally, the sky darkened around them like they were going through their own personal sunset, and they broke out of the atmosphere and into space. The rocket didn't slow or stop, however. It kept going on its quest, the predetermined flight path displayed on the dash in front of Kevin and Katja. Kevin cross-referenced it with a map displayed next to him on the wall of the rocket, but with no compass or GPS at his disposal, it was hard to determine where they were actually being taken. "What's the plan, Williams?" one of the competitors asked him through the headsets. Everyone could hear everything that was said, and Kevin was annoyed at being called out like this in front of the group. "The rocket is on a programmed path. We just have to wait for it to drop us off somewhere." "There's no clue box or anything up there?" another person asked. "Haven't found one yet. Everyone check around your seats. This thing isn't that big. If anything is in here, we'll find it." Kevin took his own advice, checking underneath his seat, looking for any sort of glove compartment in the dashboard, and finally taking the map off the wall to see if there was any sort of hidden message on it. As it happened, there was. On the back, there was a note from Sean McAllister. "Hey everyone, we've got something." Katja alerted the group through the intercom. Kevin read the clue aloud. "Idol of the lupine gods, land and ocean tides at odds. Prove yourself on lighter feet, then on to Ares' home retreat." "What does it mean?" one competitor asked. Kevin was already working through it in his head, and he relayed his thoughts into the intercom to clue everyone else in. Lupine refers to wolves, especially werewolves who change forms under the full moon. Ocean tides are also influenced by the moon. I think our destination is the moon. The prove yourself sounds like we'll have to complete a task or battle one another on the moon, or on lighter feet. And Ares' home is easy. It's Mars. Ares was a Greek god, but his Roman name was Mars. So what? We have to go to the moon, do a task, and then go to Mars? Katja asked him. Kevin nodded. That's right. But what do we have to do on the moon? Gather herbs or minerals? Someone else called out. The moon is barren, you idiot. What do you think it's growing there? There's no water. Another scolded. There is too much water. They found ice there years ago. A third chimed in. The thing I want to know is, how will we get knocked out and removed from the competition if we're in space? It's not like we can just leave someone on the moon when we go to Mars. Are we all in this round until the very end? Mason asked. I don't think the organizers would let someone be abandoned on the moon. For all we know, there's another rocket right behind us ready to rescue whoever gets knocked out. Kevin assured the group, though he wasn't convinced himself. The rules of the Epic Clash were a mystery to everyone. Why don't we test it? Mario Kessler sneered into his intercom and a scuffle broke out toward the middle of the rocket ship. Hey! Whoa, what's going on back there? Kevin demanded. The rocket had leveled out now, so he felt like he was driving a van full of wild teenagers, and when he turned around, he saw that Mario had punched the competitor next to him, actually knocking him unconscious. What is wrong with you? Katja cried. Couldn't you wait until we actually got into a battle to be such a jerk? Mason added. But Mario didn't care. He looked like he might attack the next nearest person for good measure. He was fumbling with his seatbelt trying to get out. Kevin was faster. He unlatched himself and got up from his seat to go handle things. But the second his seatbelt was no longer holding him down, he floated up into the air. Of course, he thought. No gravity. He pushed off of the back of his seat and floated back into the cabin to Mario. With the help of two other competitors, he was able to restrain Mario and tie his hands to the bottom of the seat in the last row. The empty seat left by the old man who had stayed behind in the field. Mario complained the whole time, yelling that they were violating his rights under the rules of the Epic Clash. What rules? Kevin thought. Kevin had half a mind to just knock him out then and there, but that wouldn't have been a fair fight. If you can't behave or be trusted, you will be restrained until the round is over. Now sit still and try not to kill anyone until we get to the moon. Kevin spat. Mario seethed, but he had tired himself out and didn't try to escape his bonds once he had settled down. You'll pay for this, Williams. You know you're first on my hit list. Kevin scoffed. I've been first on your list for a long time, and you've had every chance to kill me. You're just not good enough, strong enough, fast enough, or smart enough. The sooner you learn that, the happier you'll be. With that, Kevin pushed himself back up to the front and strapped himself back down in his chair. Well done, Katja muttered. Feel free to help next time, Kevin retorted. Everyone fell silent after that, but as much as they had to work together to survive in space, at the end of the round, only one would emerge victorious, unless everyone in round 5 died on the moon. The rocket ship started to slow down. Kevin looked over to Katja. There was no way that they were there yet, right? The two of them had found all 10 of the remaining competitors in the field after they had all escaped round 4 and been dumped in the middle of nowhere. Then Kevin had used his Clary Sage to find the forest where the rocket ship was hidden, and all but one of the competitors had decided to take up the task of flying to space. Now they were sailing through space, the rocket ship taking them on its pre-programmed flight path to the moon. Mario Kessler had knocked out a competitor, who was still unconscious in her seat a few rows behind Kevin, and Mario himself was securely tied up in the far back row. Kevin had threatened him if he acted up again before they reached the moon. Who knew what trouble they would encounter? They might need to work as a team in this round. Kevin guessed that they were all in the same rocket for a reason, and it wasn't to beat each other up. But now, their ship had begun to slow down, and the moon was nowhere to be seen. Kevin worried for a horrible moment that they had run out of fuel or the engine had malfunctioned or something had happened that would strand them in the nothingness of space. But then the nose of the rocket tipped down and he realized they were being directed into the International Space Station. "Everybody stay calm. We've probably been summoned to the ISS so that we can clear some sort of outer space customs." Mason joked into his headset radio, his voice crackling in everyone's ears. Kevin thought that the idea perhaps wasn't as outlandish as it sounded. If the Epic Clash organizers had built their own rocket to throw them up into space, had they alerted the United States, or Russia, or any other major presence in the Milky Way? The rocket docked them at the end of a long runway, and it dawned on Kevin that they didn't have proper spacesuits or oxygen tanks. They were stuck on the rocket, at the will of whoever had summoned them here. In the middle of the cabin, the competitor that Mario Kessler had knocked out came to consciousness. And then Sean McAllister's voice came bursting through their headsets as if he'd hijacked their radio waves. "Competitors, welcome to the final round of the Epic Clash. I see you found the clue on the back of the map, but as customary, allow me to repeat it for you. Idol of the lupine gods, land and ocean tides at odds. Prove yourself on lighter feet, then on to Ares' home retreat." Sean continued. "Before you head to the land of lupine gods, however, you need to be properly trained. Welcome to the International Space Station. Here you will be suited up and given a chance to explore some intergalactic herbs and elements to prepare yourself for zero-gravity battle. Your ship is currently docked at the end of a moonwalk, but you will be attached to the airlock in just a moment, and you'll be able to walk right inside without being exposed to outer space. Remember, this is your final round of the Epic Clash, and only one of you can win and ascend to the upper realm. Good luck." Kevin and the others pulled off their headsets as their ship dropped down below the moonwalk, and the hatch that they had entered through sealed itself to the entrance to the space station. The door opened and an American astronaut poked her head inside. She wore a set of blue coveralls and her hair was tied up in a bun. "Welcome to space. I'm Lydia. Come with me." Lydia disappeared back into the space station, and Kevin and the others pushed their zero-gravity bodies through the cabin of the rocket ship and into the station behind her. Though he didn't want to, Kevin untied Mario from his bonds in the back of the rocket and let him out. Lydia led them down a long, tube-shaped hallway and into a larger room. Every inch of the walls was covered in machinery, screens, or padding to keep them from slamming their heads as they floated around. And there wasn't a floor or ceiling. It was all walls because there was no saying which way was up and which way was down. Lydia led them through the main room of the station and over to an equipment room where she waited for them to file in. This part of the ISS looked like a gym locker room, and everyone found themselves a spot in front of a spacesuit strapped to the wall. "Okay, so you see here that you have spacesuits behind you. We do need them back at the end of your clash, so try not to destroy them in your battle." Kevin wasn't sure if she was joking, but she didn't look like she was. Lydia continued. "These suits are designed for maximum mobility, and their oxygen supplies will take you all the way the rest of your clash. Try them on, and get comfortable. Go on." The competitors pulled on their suits, which were just baggy enough to fit over the combat suits that they had been issued. The suits came with helmets that would seal to the necklines, but they all just tucked those under their arms for now. "Come with me to the herbarium." Lydia pushed her way through the next door and led them through to the next room. This one looked a bit like a walk-in pantry, and the shelves were lined with herbs in pots, dried in jars, baking under heat lamps, any form that they could be in outer space. We've cultivated these plants right here in the ISS since they were seeds. The lack of exposure to Earth's sunlight and the regular forces and minerals in the ground have altered their properties and chemical makeups in ways that are yours to discover. You have 10 minutes to explore. She slipped back out of the door she'd come in, and the 9 competitors hopped to it, everyone scrambling to find out what they needed. Kevin went straight for herbs that, on Earth, expanded blood vessels to process more oxygen at once, improved one's sense of balance, and a couple of things that, when combined, might be able to increase his speed in zero gravity. He ground them up and sampled each one of them to see how the effects were different in space. The first herb did wake him up and make him feel like he was taking in oxygen, but it also made him keenly aware of the stale smell of the air in the ISS. His smell was more sensitive toward everything, which was not true of this herb back on Earth. The second herb hit him immediately, and he got a huge boost in his sense of surroundings. He could look at any wall or person and know exactly how many steps it would take, or how hard of a push against the opposite wall to get to them. Rather than improving his balance as it would back on Earth where there was gravity, it would help him navigate his battles much more easily. The concoction of the rest of the herbs hit his system slowly, but he could feel surges of energy in his limbs and felt like he could fly to the moon without the help of any rocket. When their time was up, Lydia showed them how to seal their helmets and then sent them back into their rocket. Alone again, the 9 competitors set off. The rocket was back on its pre-programmed path to take them to the moon. Kevin started to wonder what would await them on the moon. Would Sean be there with an audience seated in a giant atmosphere bubble? Stranger things had happened in this competition. Would a massive obstacle course be set up for miles and miles that they would have to race across? Or had they somehow created space beasts for the competitors to fight in low gravity? Kevin knew one thing for sure. He was going to win this competition. He would be the one to ascend to the upper realm. The moon came into view not long after they left the space station, and some quick physics told Kevin that they were moving at nearly 5 times the speed of the average rocket NASA might put into orbit. This trip should have taken 3 days, but here they were, entering the moon's weak atmosphere. As soon as they broke through, however, something went wrong. The lights inside the cabin of their rocket cut, and the dashboard lit up red. An alarm sounded in the rocket, but not through their headsets. The thing was broken, and now Kevin had to land the ship. They sailed through the air, not as fast as free-falling on Earth, but still much faster than anyone should approach the ground. Kevin tried everything to get the controls to obey him, but they were stuck on autopilot. The ground was closer now. Katja stared at Kevin, waiting for him to reveal that he was just messing around and he was ready to rescue them. But he didn't. The ground was seconds away. The screams of the competitors rang in Kevin's ears. All he could do was strap in and hold on as the ship hit the surface of the moon. After Kevin and the other 8 competitors in round 5 of the epic clash were outfitted with spacesuits by Lydia, an astronaut at the International Space Station, they again boarded the rocket that Kevin had piloted during their trek. But soon that rocket malfunctioned, and despite Kevin's great mechanical skills, there was nothing he could do as it crashed straight onto the surface of the moon. When Kevin's eyes blinked open, he saw red flashing lights and had a terrible headache. Glancing around, he noticed that the chairs were hanging from the ceiling, and the ship had been flipped completely upside down. Katja was standing over him, shaking him awake. "Kevin, wake up. We've got problems." Kevin stood up and rubbed his temples. His head was killing him. "Is everyone all right?" he asked. Katja had a look of grave concern on her face. "Yes and no. Everyone survived the crash, but Mario took all the spacesuits with him when he evacuated, and the ship ran out of oxygen. If we don't think of something soon, we'll suffocate." Meanwhile, Mason was digging through cupboards and closets searching for extra spacesuits or anything they could use to make new ones. "I'm not finding anything over here." Just then, a calm robotic voice echoed through the ship. "Oxygen levels at 15%. Suddenly, Kevin had an idea. If there's anywhere on the ship that's bound to have extra spacesuits, it's the emergency life pod. Let's check it out. Ignoring his headache, Kevin rushed to the back of the ship and opened the door to the emergency life pod. The trio began rifling through the storage compartments until, finally, Katja found an extra spacesuit. "Look, I found one." She opened the suit and held up the helmet for all to see. Kevin was glad but not totally relieved. Just one? Are there any others? Katja double-checked the compartment where she had found the spacesuit but didn't see any others. "It looks like it's just one." After a tense pause, Mason spoke up. "Well, Kevin, if anyone's going to make it out of here alive, I think we both agree it should be the woman." Katja rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, give me a break. This isn't the Titanic, Mason." Mason held up his hands in mock defense. "Well then, please, by all means, volunteer to stay. We can let Kevin go ahead. He deserves it." Kevin looked out the window and saw a lunar space station on the horizon. "Listen to me. Nobody is going to be left behind. There's a space station right outside. There's got to be extra spacesuits in there. One of us can go and bring them back." The trio looked around at each other, wondering who should go. "I think you should go, Kevin," Katja said. "If you run into any trouble along the way, you're the one I trust the most to deal with it fastest." Mason agreed. "I second that motion." Just then, the robotic voice came through with another update. "Oxygen levels at 10%. Kevin nodded. "All right, I'll go as fast as I can. In the meantime, try to take as few breaths as possible. Deep breaths with long pauses in between. Got it?" Mason and Katja both took deep breaths. "Got it." After closing the door to the emergency escape pod and slipping into a spacesuit, Kevin pulled a lever and the escape hatch opened, allowing him to take his first step on the moon. Beyond the horizon, Kevin could see the Earth down below, but there was no time to marvel. Taking gigantic leaps, he bounced over to the space station as fast as he could. When he arrived outside the door, it automatically opened, leading him into a small chamber. The door closed behind him and clouds of white gas began to burst through the walls. "Decontamination in progress. Please hold." But there was no time to wait. Kevin tried to force the door open, but it wouldn't budge. "Decontamination in progress. Please hold." Kevin looked up and saw a control panel glowing with all different kinds of buttons. One was bright red with an exclamation point in the center. This must be the emergency unlock button. Kevin reached up and pushed it. "Emergency protocol initiated. Now sealing the door." A red light flashed above the door and the decontamination gas stopped flowing. "That's not what I wanted. Unlock the door, damn it!" The robotic voice answered. "Sorry, but the door can only be unlocked from inside. Please, have a nice day." Kevin groaned. "Useless piece of junk." Kevin did the only thing he could think of. He started punching the control panel. After a few good punches, the panel caved in, revealing a jungle of wires behind it. With a small knife attached to his spacesuit, he gathered the wires and cut them through the middle. As soon as he did, the button stopped glowing, and the red light above the door switched off. Finally, he could open the door. Beyond the decontamination chamber was a locker room. Kevin searched through the lockers until he found 2 extra spacesuits. With the spacesuits tucked under his arm, Kevin ran out of the space station and started leaping back to the crashed ship. Katja and Mason watched him through the window. They were beginning to feel lightheaded from keeping their breathing to a minimum. "There he is. I think we're going to live after all." Just then, the robotic voice chimed in again. "Oxygen levels at 0%. Your loved ones will be swiftly notified of your deaths. Goodbye." Katja and Mason both took one last deep breath. At the same time, Kevin had just arrived outside the escape pod door. When he opened it, Katja and Mason were waiting on the other side. Their faces began to turn red. They slipped into their spacesuits, put on their helmets, and gasped for air. Finally, the three were safe. As Mason and Katja got their breaths back, color returned to their faces. Despite the sub-zero temperature, Mason was heated. "Phew. Thanks, Kev. That was a close one." Katja glanced around and took in their new surroundings. With the exception of the nearby space station, the surface of the moon was an empty wasteland. "Well, great. We made it to the moon, but what are we supposed to do next? I didn't see where any of the other participants went." Kevin pointed at the space station. "Obviously, I didn't get the chance to explore the whole space station. Maybe there's something in there we're supposed to find." Katja agreed. "It's certainly worth taking a look." Thanks to the lessened gravity, they were able to bounce over to the space station much faster than they could have walked. After passing through the locker room, which was as far as Kevin got last time, they stepped into a huge garage. On the other side of the garage, Kevin noticed something big hidden under a tarp. When he pulled it off, he saw a lunar rover underneath with 4 seats. "Hey guys, come get a look at this." As Mason approached, he saw 3 empty parking spots along the way. "Looks like the other contestants have already been through here. We better hurry up if we want to win." "Agreed," Kevin replied. As he hopped behind the driver's seat, Katja took the shotgun and Mason climbed into the back. They quickly found their seatbelts and buckled up. Kevin looked around the dash for a throttle or an on switch. When he found a big red power button, he pressed it and the electric engine buzzed on. Then he gently placed his hands on the steering wheel and found 2 pedals beneath his feet. Mason leaned forward and raised an eyebrow. "You sure you know how to drive this thing?" Kevin nodded with a relaxed shrug. "Well, it's got 2 pedals and a steering wheel. How hard could it be?" When Kevin pressed down on the pedal, the rover zipped into action. As they turned out of the garage, Katja noticed a GPS system light up on a screen in between her and Kevin. "Hey, look at this. There's a destination programmed into the GPS." Kevin glanced down and saw a red flag blinking on a mini-map. "By the looks of it, we need to head about 7 miles southwest." Kevin turned the rover and started heading in that direction. The moon's surface was a tricky terrain to navigate. Kevin did his best to weave the rover between dense clumps of rocks and steep lunar craters, but occasionally he couldn't help hitting something, and the whole rover would bounce up and down with a thud. As they got closer to their destination, Kevin looked out and saw some kind of structure on the horizon. Much to his surprise, it almost looked like a roller coaster, with big loops, sharp turns, and long, sudden drops. "Do you guys see that? It's almost like a roller coaster." When they were close enough to see it in full, they finally realized what it was. "That's no roller coaster, it's a racetrack. Look, the GPS led us right to the starting line." Kevin drove the rover onto a paved road and stopped it in front of a black and white checkered line. Directly in front of them, the road curved up into a ramp, and beyond that, it was utter madness. An asphalt web of sweeping curves and high-reaching loops. A robotic voice spoke through the GPS system. "You have reached your destination. To receive your next objective, please drive forward." Mason gulped. "I hope this thing has airbags." The 3 hung on for dear life as Kevin drove onward.